My name is Leon, and this is On Lightness, a monthly podcast consisting of conversations about the meaning of the word lightness with people from different fields. This month we have a conversation with Nicolas Dorval-Bory, who has been teaching as an architect in Versailles since 2014 and just recently has been announced to be the new director of the Versailles Architecture School. And he has an architecture office based in Paris, France, where we met in early February to have this conversation about climate resilience, the light spectrum, astrology, and his childhood in southern France. Enjoy. So we're gonna start with lightness, lack of weight. Our built environment is overweight. Reasons for this might be that the idea of privacy and security require that we isolate ourselves more and more. It might be that thermal comfort requires thermal inertia and thereby more mass, or it might be because lightness is often an answer to a very specific requirement, and housing more often needs a universal solution. And to have an answer to all these functions and needs of housing, things often become overweight. The truth is that we are slowly running out of resources, but our built environment reflects that there's like an endless supply of building material. So in your experience, what are factors that determine the weight of our built environment?
Well, I think we might find ourselves in a kind of a weird and bad moment for this question of weight and architecture. For different reasons, the 20th century has been building a lot in concrete to make buildings or construction more efficient, to resist fires, to have wider spans also. At the same time, the thermal comfort and energy issues were addressed through an abundance of energy, oil mostly, but not only. So it was possible to build, let's say, big structures in concrete and to make them thermally comfortable through a lot of energy. So you could have, let's say, fat structures that looked a bit lightweight somehow, thanks to a lot of glazing. That's what maybe the international style is about, like fat structure and a lot of glazing, a lot of glass in the facade. So it kind of looks like it's lightweight, but inside the structure is really heavy because it's mostly concrete. The thing is that the world of construction kept this approach of structure and the advantages of concrete for lifespan, for the cost, for the way that concrete is so easy to manipulate and to how it resists fires and damage and stuff. But then came the environmental crisis of energy. Maybe the first shock in 73 with the oil crisis that led to some first thinking about how can we do things that are bioclimatics, things like that. And a crisis that struck much harder in 2007-8, maybe, when there was the fourth assessment report from the IPCC, making us realize that we are responsible for the climate change, let's say. So while the industry of construction kept the let's say the habits of building in a fat way, we had to rethink our relationship with the glazing and thermal deperditions, stuff like that. So while we had a very fat structure inside, we started to build more insulation in the outside and trying to build a facade that was thicker, maybe not with so much thermal inertia, but with more insulation. So the situation in which we are today is a situation of fatness of the structure, let's say, and fatness of the facade at the same time. But there are both consequences of not the same situation. One is an optimization of cost and resistance, and the other one is energy crisis. And the fact that we have those two different type of fatness in buildings today is maybe something that I find consequences that you didn't choose somehow. It's like results. It's not really something that we anticipated and that it's more like habits that we inherit from a situation.
I get it. It's like a development that like it was always added. Now we have to solve this, so let's add some thickness. But I also wonder, do we need this thermal inertia to a certain degree, or could we have extremely lightweight housing? Would we climatically feel okay in these spaces, where also maybe buildings of La Vassal that are super hot in the summer, but is it necessary that with weight comes comfort, you know?
Yeah, actually, there is not really such thing as absolute necessity. There are only conditions and situations and degrees of acceptance of what a space could be. There is something that I find really interesting in the weight of materials in the sense of thermal inertia. Inertia in thermodynamics is a synonym of resilience. And it means actually the ability of a material to maintain its temperature even if the outside temperature changes a lot. It's to take an image, it would be like a big boat, even if there are some big waves coming at it, the boat is not going to change its route because it has a lot of resilience, a lot of inertia. What is interesting in that is that properly manipulated inertia is the best tool to avoid or to prevent unexpected variations. And what I find interesting in that is what we have been witnessing with climate change is not only a global warming. I mean, if it was just about saying Paris is going to get a bit hotter, so let's take the examples of Barcelona or Madrid and just let's start to have Paris ready for this new climate. That would be a bit too simple, because I don't think it's going to be the case exactly. What we see today with climate change is more instability in climate. It's not only about global warming. It might be a global warming, but locally it's going to create a lot of instability. The problem is that maybe you are going to have a heat wave sometimes, but the next year it's going to be a cold wave and much colder than what have been experienced before. And in face of these huge variations, I think we need to have a lot of inertia to be able to navigate through those big waves, let's say. The thing is that having a lot of weight, a lot of inertia like this, requires to use it very carefully, because if you have a big boat and you give the wrong direction in the first place, the boat, it's going to ask you a lot of energy to change its route. So it's really powerful, but it's really also a responsibility to have big inertia in a building, because if you don't if you don't calculate this inertia, you can also produce a building that remains hot when there is a hot heat wave. And the thing is that that is, I think, today the problem of inertia of the current situation buildings. The thing that I explained before, these concrete slabs and columns and structure and a lot of thermal bridges and stuff, was never thought of as a thermal mass. It was thought of as a capable structure. It was thought of as something that frees up the space, that is cost effective, but never really as something that has inertia for thermal comfort. I think if we want to address those questions today, we need to rethink a bit the role of the envelope and the role of this thermal mass and the role of this lightness. Maybe you can have some envelopes that are really light, but maybe you need also at the same time a big mass inside your building, maybe really deep inside your building, not exposed to the facade. A bit like, there is this house that I often cite that is a house by not an architect, but David Ogden, that's his name. And he built a house that is all very lightweight, a wooden house with a very thin facade. And the core of the house is 3 big fireplaces that are all aggregated together. So you look at the plan and you see that there is a big piece of stone and masonry in the center. And the rest of the inhabitable space just revolves around this thermal mass, and the rest of the building is kind of lightweight. It's just a wood facade, you know.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I see in your work a lot of interest in revealing invisible forces, and I think my interest in lightweight structures also comes with this amazement universally, but especially for gravitational forces. And I think that lightweight structures that you often see in bridges or places where it really is specifically needed to keep the structure light, you get these almost fragile looking buildings, and you get these buildings sometimes really visualize gravity in a way, because they are the bare minimum that makes this building hold. So I wanted to ask you if you remember doing a project where it was really about doing the bare minimum when it comes to the structure.
We work on structure and we work on balances of forces, but not trying to express the minimum matter and the minimum effort, let's say. But I can recall of a project. We did a competition project in Munich for Kooperative Großstadt. It was a housing project, and we had this idea of building, let's say, 3 buildings in one, with different techniques, let's say, answering to different programs also that were asked in the brief. So the basement had kind of a wide span between columns, and it was all concrete, and the shape also of the ceiling and of these rooms in the ground floor was a bit with let's say angles, like pyramid-like ceiling, to break the sound reverberation, because it was supposed to host a workshop, like carpentry workshops and stuff like that. So really noisy, loud, low frequencies also. So we thought that it was nice to make a very fat and heavy ground floor. And on top of that, because we already wasted a lot of concrete doing so, we were thinking that the rest of the building had to be in wood. And we had, I think, 5 or 6 stories to develop. But I didn't feel like doing everything with the same technique, because also the program required different types of apartments. So I thought maybe we do 2 or 3 floors in really traditional carpentry, like an old barn would be in oak carpentry with the traditional braces and assemblage like that. So it's kind of fat pieces of wood, and there is a real a strong hierarchy also in this type of construction. Like the column is a bit thicker than the beam, and then you have the rafters that are a bit smaller, and it makes really good use also of a trunk of a piece of wood that you have those beautiful drawings that show how you can extract a big beam and a smaller beam and planks and rafters from just a single trunk. So 2 or 3 stories, I don't remember exactly, of this building were made with this technique that is a bit too fat, but that is also has a strong presence also. So it defines spaces. And on the 2 last floors, we had much more flexible apartments. We had programs that needed to be really flexible, that could evolve in the time. And because it was the 2 last floors, we thought that it could be really a lightweight wooden structure. The way, in the US, it's really common to build with those platform frames or balloon frame structures. And it's a very interesting wood construction technique that I'm also interested in, because it's completely the opposite of the other one. There is no hierarchy. You just need to find many, many planks of 14 by 4 centimeters. And that's just the density of them that makes the structure. If you have to make a wall, you put them every 40 centimeters. If it's a slab, it's maybe every 30 centimeters. And there is no real beauty of the hierarchy of this structure. It's just a repetition. So it's very serial. It's almost like serial music, where you have the same notes and just change the speed between the notes, and it makes the music. So it's a bit like that. And I like it very much also because it's just maybe one type of element that you repeat a lot and that you can also dismantle easily. And so we just stacked this lightweight structure that wouldn't be able to hold anything on top, because it's not so resistant. But it was flexible and resistant enough to stand on top of this building. So I like very much this progression of gravity of the concrete that can hold the sound of the workshop, but also holds the weight of the traditional barn and oak structure. And on top of that, the pine wood platform frame that was even lighter, that can be also dismantled at some point. Mm-hmm. That was on top. So you got like a gradient of structure.
Okay, yeah, I can see very much that gravity played a big role in that design. One of your early works was called Paysage en Exil. A long time ago. And it was this greenhouse producing fog, right? And you would walk. I think there was the reference to a Jules Clément text about plants spreading through storm. Maybe what made you design it the way you did, and for you, was this also an act of revealing invisible forces in some way?
Yeah, it's a really an early work. It's also the first work I did with my at the time partner Raphaël Bétillon. Before that, we only had discussions about architecture. We never really worked together. And many of our discussions were revolving about more immaterial ways of defining architecture. I was really fascinated when I was a student by the Blur building by Diller and Scofidio. That for me was a kind of an epiphany of, architecture could be something else than a building. It could be a building that dissolves itself. However, it still had a structure inside to produce this mist. But the structure wasn't really the building. The building was more than the structure that was almost nothing, and the building really was the conditions that you inhabited within this big fog. So that was really triggering for me for many of my interests later. At the same time, I was very interested, like many young architects at the time, by Lacaton-Vassal, and the figure of also the winter garden, the greenhouse, let's say, was really powerful, because it's like you said, it's a very lightweight structure. It's really minimum. It's a few tubes in galvanized steel, a bit of plastic fabric, transparent, and we built the greenhouse ourselves in just 1 or 2 days. So it was a very interesting experiment. And so it was a kind of a naive but straightforward attempt to gather things that we were interested in and to see how we can make a project out of those 3 references. So maybe, let's say, the Blur building by Diller and Scofidio, some pieces by Lacaton-Vassal, and the work of Gilles Clément through Les Plantes Vagabondes. So yeah, a bit straightforward, saying we love all of this. How can we make a project out of it? And once you say that, you start to take decisions also. It's not just taking the 3 references and putting them together. I wouldn't do it this way now, because I'm a bit more maybe wise or experienced, but at the time that was a perfect way of taking decisions. What are you interested in Lacaton-Vassal? Exactly. And once you say that you like the greenhouse, how do you put it? How does it enter in relationship with the fog? How do you produce the fog? And so that was more than a project. I think that was a very good exercise for us.
Yeah. And it's also a good way of having kind of a big impact with a minimal amount of things at hand, I feel like. Because the impression it leaves is really like, but it's really just these. I mean, I guess the installation of these nozzles and stuff there is a bit of work that comes with that. And
but I must say, in this regard, that's something that I wanted to point out also in the beginning, that that's something that is tricky with the lightweight structure, or thing that looks lightweight, is that in comparison to what has inertia and what has mass, the problem with the lightweight structure is that it's inherent that they are going to consume a lot of energy somehow. And indeed, it's almost nothing, the Blur building or our Paysage en Exil. But in the end, it's a lot of electricity, and it's a lot of water that is consumed, And it's also some materials for the greenhouse that are not so good for the environment. It's not so much, the weight is almost nothing, but it's not neutral. It's not neutral at all. It's like you say, but you don't need to live in a stone house. You can also live in a tent, in a very good tent. And I think maybe in the month of April, May, maybe the whole summer, it's really gentle and nice. But as soon as the winter hits, or when the sun is too high in summer, it's going to be very hard to live there. So you are going to, the lightness of the structure implies that you need to compensate somehow to find another equilibrium. That's why we don't live all the time in tents, and that we use it for camping just a few days. And so I think obviously that it doesn't make sense to live and to be all the time everywhere in big masses, but it wouldn't make sense either to spend all of our time in light, really light structures. And I like very much this drawing, you know, the Home is Not a House by Rayner Banham, in the architecture of the well-tempered environment. But when he wrote this, and when they do the drawing with François d'Allégret, it's 69, there is something that is at the base of this drawing, of the environmental bubble, how they call it. It's that there is a lot of energy, you have a lot of energy to power your bubble. So your lightweight structures always require, either directly or indirectly, a lot of energy.
Yeah, I think there's also certain functions light structures are able to answer maybe without being energy intensive, but when you use it as a replacement for things that require a lot of energy, it can result in awkward situations where you really feel that it's not meant to be the solution for this. And although I love Freiauto, for example, if you look at the foundations of the Olympic Stadium, like when you see the counterweight of all this lightness that happens above, of course there is scales and systems that require different answers. But I think it makes a lot of sense to think in functions when it comes to these things, and to find solutions for certain functions, and to really split this blob that we sometimes call a universal solution. It's just this fat concrete structure. This could be divided into to single functions with single answers, and you would probably have much less material if you would really do this consequently in an efficient way. But yeah, it's good you pointed out this other side of lightness. Maybe we switch to the topic of luminance, which also I had one semester in Bergen where we worked on particles, and then it was really interesting because I went into this world of dust particles, you know, how they inhabit our spaces, what is part of it. It's like our second DNA can be found in our dust particles, and then it can also show that there's a mine close to you because you have these particles, and they also are the basis to form clouds, and there's this whole world. And what I found particularly interesting is how this space that light makes, in a way, can be revealed by particles. If you think about like a night situation and the street light, and you have fog, you suddenly see really this cone of light, right? And in the same way, light reveals particles. When you suddenly see dust flying because the light comes in an angle, and you see. So this interrelationship between particles and light I found very interesting. Maybe my question would be what we can do as architects to reveal the beauty of light, or to design with light in mind.
Yeah, I think one first thing that I would recommend, let's say, would be to consider light not as a whole, but both as a tiny part of a wider thing that is the electromagnetic spectrum, that starts with really tiny waves and that finishes with long waves. In this really wide field, we only see a really small part, between 400 and 700 nanometers, more or less. And below that, you have the infrareds that are basically the heat. You have the close infrared that are almost visible, and some animals can see them, that are a bit of heat, but most of the heat from the sun is in this level, but the heat from a radiator is not in the same wavelength. It's a bit farther from that. And on the other side, you have the ultraviolets, and other type of rays also. And all of those rays, all of those radiations have an impact on our body, on our environment, on the plants, on many physical phenomena. So I think the first thing is to consider light as I said that it was first a small part of a wider spectrum, but also within the visible light to consider light as not something that is plain and entire, but it's made of really multiple small wavelengths, and the composition of that, the spectral power distribution, as we call it, is really something that is fascinating, that we try to work with on different projects to address this question, because when you work with natural light and with artificial lights, it's really different, and especially with the rise of the LED lamps, we saw that some peaks in wavelengths were more important, so they had a real effect on the body. So I think to take this short word for maybe a short idea that is just light, and trying to replacing it in at the same time a wider context, and cutting it into also different smaller fragments, is really the starting point to do something interesting with light today. Because also that's maybe the first time that in history that we have the tools also to understand it, maybe manipulate it, and observe and understand. So for me, it's really a good starting point, trying to understand better what is light, what it does to our bodies, and what it does to plants and to the environment. Recently, we did a project that was revolving around the polarization of light, which it's funny, I posted this morning on Instagram. And the experiments that we did were completely mind-blowing, to see that there is a component that we almost never talk about, which is polarization. That is a special ability or characteristic of natural light, and something that we don't see with our eyes, but that bees, for example, they see, and they locate themselves through the analysis of the polarization of light. And I think there was something really, really powerful in the understanding of what is this behavior that we don't see, and that can reveal many things that can completely change the way also we see architecture. In those images that I posted this morning, I don't know, maybe you will see, there is just one source of light in the whole image. It's a LED screen, and the LED screen has already a polarized light. It emits a polarized light. If you look at the LED screen, like your computer, you don't see that it's polarized. But if you take a polarizing filter, you can block this. You can block this light, so you can look through the filter, and your screen appears completely black. But if you put an object in front of your screen, the object is going to be illuminated by your screen. So what you are going to see in the filter is that you don't see the light itself; it's completely black. But the light that enters or bounces onto your object, you see it, because the object has the ability to repolarize the light in a different way. So it makes a really strange situation where you are in a completely pitch black room with objects that lit themselves alone. You don't see where the light is coming from. It's really powerful, and you see, if you don't get into the physics of it, you never understand that you can do something with that in architecture.
What I know about polarization is very little, but I No, from the camera filter, or sunglasses sometimes have a filter.
Yeah, for 3D movies.
For 3D movies, for example.
But what I noticed is that I can suddenly see through the windows of cars, where normally I see reflection. I can see the faces, or the reflection of water puddles. Yeah, suddenly you can see to the ground. But yeah, very fascinating. And since we're running out of time, I'm gonna go to the feeling of lightness. There are many ways of feeling lightness. Like the weightlessness of swimming can give us an idea of how the weightlessness of outer space maybe feels like. And then there's the carefree lightness that children have, that we can kind of relive by having children ourselves again, and you kind of see the world through their eyes again. And then there's the feeling without pressure and burden, which can, in current times, it can be a bit hard to have this feeling, but sometimes when you achieve something that really felt important to you afterwards, you can have this feeling of lightness. So I wanted to ask you, what are moments of lightness for you?
Well, that will be really, really obvious and really common, let's say. But I think looking at the sky is something that is for me. But you know, when you were saying all of those examples, I was thinking that all of them come with the price of a really heavy thing or a burden that is attached to that. And maybe you have the feeling of the lightness because you were before, or you will after, have something that is heavy to carry somehow. And I think that's it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that there is kind of a balance. You cannot have only mass and you cannot have only lightness. So I think it's about benefiting both moments and to balance them right. I'm thinking that because when I think about when I looking at the sky, or during the day, but mostly during the night, so when I look at the stars around, when you look at the sky, you look at the infinite weight of all the stars and stellar dust. That is the heaviest and biggest thing that you can ever look at. You know, that's something that is terribly bigger and heavier than you, and that is so powerful. The tiniest star that you can see in the sky could swallow the entire solar system, maybe at least the sun. But that's something that is much bigger, and that maybe because it's big provides a sense of lightness. Well, you are looking at that and you are nothing within this, so maybe it gives you this. It gives me a feeling of being light and insignificant somehow, but that's good. I think that's what one guy called relativity, maybe.
You look at the stars. You have an interest in astronomy.
Yeah, I like very much astronomy, but I like to look at the sky just with my eyes, and I have a small telescope, and I have been also interested a lot in the tools of astronomy, especially the big telescopes. So we did a small research project in the office 10 years ago, and then I organized a studio and a trip to the Atacama deserts with my students to visit the biggest telescopes there. We did this twice, and now we are building a telescope an observatory in Burgundy, semi-professional observatory with a planetarium as well. So that's something that makes me very happy to be able to work on those questions and those typologies that deals with those questions.
Beautiful that you can land at that point with architecture.
Yeah, so lucky.
Yeah. A lot of the ways we function have their root in our childhood. If you could tell me about one or more memories of lightness growing up.
I can tell you about both, because I grew up in this very rural environment with really clear skies, because there were no light pollution at all, and the south of France, so it's a bit more sunny and better weather than Paris. And also in this area, the ground itself was karstic soil, so it's limestone with a lot of caves underneath. So when from time to time you can visit caves, and there are a lot of caves. So it gives you an impression that the sky is full of something. When you look at the sky, you see always filled with stars. It's not like a blank cover like in Paris or in Belgium, where it's gray. So it's really vivid, in the south. And the soil in the ground is also filled with something. It's filled with void. It's filled with traces of prehistoric mans, or you find many things. Beautiful caves, and also you have shapes that are completely crazy and weird, and subterranean rivers and stuff like that. So it's like a Jules Verne universe there. So first, this childhood feeling of having both the sky and the ground that were filled with something, it was such a strong impression for me when I was a kid. And then the river and the wind, and something that I described once I think the text is on my website because I wrote it a few years ago. But that's something that I really think about frequently. My little village where I grew up is really close to a big river, and at night in the evening, we had a big field in front of our house, a field that was a bit with a gentle slope, and you could see coming out of the forest in the background the fog slowly moving toward us, like it was climbing a bit the field and the slope, like that, progressively, until at some point it was completely swallowing the house. And in the morning it was the exact same thing, that you could wake up with a level of fog, and the fog was slowly moving away, like going back to the woods. Or you could feel that it could disappear slowly. Maybe sometimes it was a bit like a piece of cloud that was moving up but just a small, like not a flame, but something, piece of fog, like that. And that was really, really beautiful. And I think that was a really powerful childhood memory for me, recurrent, coming. And when I first saw during my studies the Blur building by Deleuze video, it really connected, it really made sense. Those great architects from New York saying to me, what you experienced as a kid was indeed architecture, And so I switched at that moment, really.
It's very interesting how often in your work you kind of go deep into these tools to discover certain aspects, and I think in a way it feels like you use architecture as a tool to explore these things that you already found fascinating in your childhood. Maybe we all do it or try to do it as good as we can. I wanted to ask you about a big moment of inspiration that kind of transformed your view, but maybe you just said what kind of moment was maybe one of the biggest ones in shaping your vision in architecture.
Yeah, I think the one I mentioned before, discovering the Blur building, I didn't go there. Actually, it was in Yverdon-les-Bains in 2002. I didn't go there. I just saw pictures. That was a big regret. Hence the will to reproduce it with our first project. But another moment that was also defining for me, well, I can recall several, but there was one that was really striking, was an exhibition also by Philippe Ramen Decoster at the time. Philippe Ram became a good friend later on. But I discovered his work through an exhibition in the Centre Culturel Suisse. I don't know which year, maybe 2004 or 5, something like that. And there was this piece of, in a courtyard, just a few lamps and wisteria, I think that's the English name. Well, a growing plant like that. And the piece was called Eternal Spring. And Philippe Ram had reproduced the light that it wasn't spring at all, but he reproduced the light that was supposedly the first day of spring, like maybe calculating the existing light from the sunlight at the moment and adapting the artificial light to mimic this system. And that was also a defining moment for me, saying that architecture wasn't so much about the space itself or the matter of the space itself, but it was about the conditions. So I think that was a displacement of ideas that was really powerful, moving from space itself to time, and to time extracting a condition that was luminous in this case, and this luminous condition making it define what was space. So it was a kind of amazing loop that also made me think, architecture can be defined in another way than just walls and shapes and matter.
I wonder if it's sometimes hard because you have a lot of fascination in these atmospheric conditions, or let's say ephemeral phenomena also. And do you sometimes struggle when you have to build an actual building to still kind of put these things that fascinate you into it?
I would say that that's the thing of being an architect and not an artist. Maybe being an artist is being able to pick those subjects of fascination and going deep into them without so much looking on the side, But when you are an architect, you work mostly by commissions. So from the first day that you are going to compromise somehow with many things. And I think the beauty and the difficulty of this job is that you need to find interest inside the diversity of what people come to you. Sometimes it's a social housing, and sometimes it's an apartment, and it has been bathrooms and kitchens. When I began to work, it was a lot of projects like that, very simple. What I think is that this little fascination that you have for something, it can force you to be the good architect for the 90% of the rest of the project. It gives you like a clear definition, a clear idea, and also rules to follow, because you have this small idea that you need to pursue. It's not that you do your job 90% and you have fun 10%. It's not this way. It may be the other way around. But you need to have fun, and you need to find really the interest everywhere.
Okay, I'll do a last question. Some people thrive from having restrictions, right? Often in history also, like scarcity leads to innovation in a way. You have to work with what you have. And I know from myself that it can be really overwhelming to not have restrictions, right? You have this fascination and you can do anything. So it's also sometimes nice to have this, I have to do these certain things. How can I do them in a way that feels right to me? So I think it's really interesting, the filters that we either get from our profession or that we have to define ourselves. What I see you also do a lot, like picking certain things that serve as a tool that also restrict you and maybe blur out all the distraction that could come in other ways. Okay, last question would be about maybe your perspective of transforming the built environment both as an educator and as an architect, and the dynamics between these two roles, because you're very active in teaching but also with your office. So what's the dynamic between these two roles for you?
Yeah, teaching has been a really big part of my professional life. I've been teaching for 15 years almost. I must say that also I started to teach as an assistant to Philip Ram because I had an interest in him and his work, and we got to know each other, and he felt that I was involved enough, so he invited me to be his assistant. So I started to teach thanks to him, and that was really important for me. But then I started to teach alone also. It's important to note also that I don't teach anymore as of 3 weeks, 1 month, because I became I was appointed the director of the school of Versailles. So I'm technically not a teacher anymore, but I see my role as a director maybe as a super teacher also, meaning that give my perspective to a whole school and not just a group in a studio. So I think that's cool in that sense. And the interactions between the office and teaching has been to spend a lot of time on observation and try to understand any given situation. And the thing I was saying about light, that we should try to consider light in a more precise way. It's something that is easier to do when you do teaching, because obviously you have maybe more time to think with the students about those questions. Tried really hard to get my students to observe the reality and to try to be objective as possible about reality, to understand the physics. So yeah, sometimes I'm asked, people tell me, but in your office you do research, and in your teaching you do research. But I don't see that really as research per se. I think for me that's just what it is to be an architect. Like you just look for things all the time a bit. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I think it's very interesting that you say it's similar, because for many people I think it could also be very different. But the way you work in these both roles is similar. Maybe the impact you have is different.
Yeah, the outcome in my office is maybe more personal. I mean, it's really my point of view, but it's also modified by all the people I worked with in my office, or the engineers or stuff like that. So, but when I work with students, obviously I give the constraints, we develop together, but in the end it's the project of the students. But the frame has been defined by me, so no, once again, I think it's kind of also a bit similar. You know, like you define frames and you have many people working with you to fill in this frame, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.